Hi, my name is Jaime Stief. I work with the Tamarack Institute. You're here for the webinar titled Collaboration, Beginnings and Endings, being hosted by members of the Tamarack Institute's Learning Center. And we're just getting started, and we're very happy to have you here. So today's webinar we'll start with a land acknowledgement. I will go through some logistics and technology, and then we'll be discussing collaboration beginnings, collaboration endings, and if anybody has added questions to the Q&A panel, we'll go through them there. So we're going to get started with a land acknowledgement. I'm joining you from the traditional territories of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, colonially known as Waterloo, Ontario. We encourage you to share the territories that you're joining us from in the chat box for today. And the reason we're doing this is firstly a step in truth of just naming and acknowledging where you're joining from and knowing that the steps towards reconciliation come after. But yeah, please let us know where you're joining from today. And with that, I am going to hand the microphone over to my colleague, Sylvia Cheuy, who is the Consulting Director for Collective Impact at the Tamarack Institute.
Hi, thanks so much, Jamie. Welcome, everyone. I'm already watching and seeing we're covering coast to coast, so that's pretty exciting. As Jamie said, I'm the Director of Collaboration with the Tamarack's Learning Center, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone today to our webinar on collaboration beginnings and endings, where we are going to be exploring considerations to effectively launch, sustain, renew, and end collaborations. So, with me today, I have the pleasure of introducing first Linda Mollenhauer. Linda is the chair of Ignite NPS. It's a foundation committed to igniting new ways of working in the nonprofit sector. Linda is a real thought leader in this issue of collaboration in nonprofits. She co-led the Reimagining Governance Lab in collaboration with the Ontario Nonprofit Network, where she drew upon both her experience as CEO of Imagine Canada and more than 20 years working and consulting with funders and nonprofits to really help talk about what it takes to do collaboration well. And that's what we're hoping to explore with you and hear from you more about, Linda, in terms of, what's the readiness that an organization needs to think about, even before we step into the work of collaboration. And then joining Linda and I today, Liz Weaver, my colleague, co-CEO of Tamarack's Learning Center, where she leads our collective leadership area. And the impetus for this webinar was really rooted in a paper you wrote probably about a year or so ago, Liz, on collaboration beginnings and endings and what it takes. Liz is really passionate about power and the potential of communities to get to impact on complex issues. And many of you may remember before joining Tamarack, Liz led the Vibrant Communities work and also the poverty reduction work in Hamilton. So she's got firsthand experience in the trenches of making collaboration on a tough issue work. All right, Liz, why don't you take it away? Give us a framing around collaboration.
Great. Thanks so much, Sylvia. Nice to see everybody in this virtual space. I'm going to just do a little bit of background around collaboration. If we go to the next slide, I think this is a really kind of interesting framing for collaboration. It's the art of getting things done through people, but I would say with people. I might change Mary's quote. And the next slide kind of goes a little bit deeper, where it's really this level of working together. It's both the structure of collaboration and as we'll see a little bit in the next slide, there's many structures to collaboration, and it's also a process for change, and it's about partners working together. A tool that we use a lot at Tamarack is the collaboration spectrum, because we know that collaboration, there are many different ways that groups and organizations come together to collaborate together. And sometimes you're sitting at a table where you're thinking, I'm going to join that table so I can observe what others are doing. That might fit into the category of competition or compete on the spectrum. Sometimes you are coexisting with others there are lots of examples where the form of collaboration is really just an exchange of information across partners. And then we start to move along the spectrum where groups are more intentionally cooperating, coordinating, collaborating, and then maybe even there are examples of groups integrating either a program or a service or integrating organizations together. You can see the two other things that you want to think about on this spectrum. Organizations that are in the more competition, coexisting form of collaboration are more loosely coupled together. There's higher degrees of turf amongst those organizations, although not everybody around the collaborative table might feel the same way. There might be some partners that are there for competition aspects and other partners that consider, no, we're cooperating or we're communicating. So that's interesting. At the other end of the spectrum, where there's more intentionality about working together, there has to be a more tightly connected network of organizations, and trust, building trust, leveraging trust, engaging in relationship building is all really important for that deepening of trust amongst the partners. What we've seen at Tamarack is that sometimes collaborations identify where they are and where they want to stay. And sometimes collaborations move along the spectrum. They either move forward or they move back, given the circumstances. We have a tool which we've added to this slide where you can actually, with your collaboration table, identify where do you sit on the collaboration spectrum and what are the implications for you around this around the collaborative work that you're doing. If we go to the next slide, there's a really interesting way of looking at why we collaborate together. And there's a number of different reasons. This might not be all of them, but it's actually a really good place to start. Sometimes we collaborate because there's an opportunity in front of us that either a funder has requested that we take on that opportunity, but that we do so in collaboration. Sometimes it's an opportunity that's been identified by you as the convener of the collaboration or by a partner around the collaboration. Sometimes we collaborate because we want to build our own organizational capacity. So we know that there is need for, let's say, a food security program in our community, but we're not the only partner delivering out food or on related issues to food security. And so in order to meet community needs, we join together as partners to build our collective capacity around the issue. Sometimes we join a collaborative because we really want to engage in creativity, trying to figure out what's the newest thing and how can we use this collaborative to learn from each other and to skill up our work. What we might suggest, and I'm giving you a little bit of a preview, Sylvia, Linda, and I are working on a document about collaboration from the perspective of boards of directors and CEOs of organizations or executive directors of organizations. The reason why you collaborate should be directly connected to the mission, the vision, and the values of your organization. And there should be some intentionality behind the motivation that your organization has around joining a collaboration. The next slide really begins to look at some of the data around collaboration. So we know that people who are in collaboration or in the collaboration, doing active collaborations, like to have tools, but they don't necessarily utilize all the tools that are out there, right? So it's really important to kind of be thinking in advance about what will it take for your organization to be an effective collaboration partner before you join the table, or if you're already at the table, to do a little bit of an assessment of what that might look like. And we know that there are 3 solutions to really having really effective collaborations: a good process, building your collaboration skill set, and the leadership around the table. So the next slide will really give you a bit more information about some of the collaborative challenges that we have been reading about. But we would welcome you in the chat box to maybe look at this list of different challenges and identify one that speaks to you and the collaborative work that you are engaged in. Is it that you are not being able to manage conflict constructively? Are you feeling like you're not getting recognition for the time and energy you're putting into it? Are there divergent goals around the collaborative table? We'd love to hear from you about the challenges that you're facing, and that will help us as we think through kind of both the culture of collaboration and also the way we might collaborate better together. Some of that will really help inform the resource that we're working on. So I'm going to throw it back to you, Sylvia, just to take us to the next point, and hopefully that's helpful in terms of thinking through the why behind collaboration.
Beautiful. Thanks, Liz. In fact, I'm going to very quickly throw it to Linda, because Linda, we have been talking, as Liz has referenced, about even before the collaboration starts, there are things that will position you to be an effective collaboration partner, and things that you would want to be thinking about. So tell us what we think, share some of the thinking we've been chatting about in that regard.
Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about one element of readiness, and that is the notion. For every person sitting at a collaborative table, there's an organization sitting behind them. And that organization has a culture, and that culture can enable or can hinder that work. So I think culture is absolutely essential starting place to readiness. And by culture, we're talking about it may be the very formally stated organizational values, but it's also all the mindsets and biases and individual values of your board and your staff. And sometimes they're very visible. You can put this slide up. Thanks, Jamie. The next slide. Sometimes they're very visible. Sometimes they're not, but they're very, very powerful. And they influence things like who's recruited for leadership, capacity, like how resources and time is allocated, and processes like what decisions are made, and how you might handle accountability. All of these have an impact on your organization's ability to choose the right collaborative opportunities, and also will have an impact on what kind of contribution your organization and the people sitting around the table are going to make to its success. So that's sort of the theory behind it. Let's dig in to the next slide. Wanted to highlight 3 specific values that surfaced in our research. These organizational values that will enable the organization to be a good and sought after collaborative partner. The first is a focus on purpose, your mission, your outcomes, and the people you serve. And that the organization, the board and the staff believe that the organization's purpose, not just its long-term sustainability or its own programs and services, should be at the center of every single critical decision. It also believes that to fulfill its purpose, it's got to look beyond itself, to understand the larger system and then work collaboratively within it. This sort of more expansive view means you can more easily find common cause with others, and you'll have a much better idea which are the best kind of opportunities that align with yours. Number 2, the organization values agility, adaptiveness, and innovation because It believes that these are absolutely essential assets in a world, this world of sort of increased complexity and accelerated change. Having these attributes means that the organization will be more aligned with the inherently complex nature of collaboration. For example, it's more open to risk and being able to manage multiple accountabilities. It's going to be less rigid and hierarchical, and it's more likely to empower staff to make decisions collectively at the collaborative table, which is exactly where they need to be made. The third is relationship building is prioritized, and it's approached with deep intentionality because the organization at the very core, its board and its staff, at the very core, believe that positive, authentic relationships with all stakeholders is key to the success. This means you're going to have a better reputation in the community for building and sustaining trusting relationships, and you'll also have deeper relationships with others. So you'll know who are the right partners. You'll also be able to bring these skills to the collaborative table. You'll be a trust builder, which we know is an absolute cornerstone to any successful collaboration.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to drill down. I've been busy watching all the richness in our chat. It's clear many of you are living and breathing collaboration at different stages, which is great. I'm focusing on beginnings. So if we can go to the next slide. I think for me, to begin well, you have to have at least, at the some alignment in the team around what's the problem or the opportunity that you're seeking to address. How will you know that you've been successful? What outcomes will you have achieved, right? You need to have done a scan of the environment around you. So often we get kind of caught up in a problem or an issue and we dive right in trying to come up with a solution. And we can often miss the opportunity to build upon and align with many others who are already working on dimensions of this issue. And that can also be hugely informative around sharpening the focus of your collaborative work within that broader issue. Getting a familiarity about what the data is telling you about the issue. And also really doing that gut check first and foremost, like, is collaboration the right solution? And or for what dimensions of the issue or the role, the work, do we believe collaboration is best suited for? I love this. In Liz's paper, she shares the story of a very seasoned collaborator, Deb Halliday, and her favorite method of the 100 cups of coffee, where if she's the initiator, the convener of a collaborative effort, before she even brings the collaborative together, part of her homework is going out and sharing about 100 cups of coffee, exploring the issue from various perspectives, hearing from different people, sussing out sort of their passion around this, and getting a real feel for how is the issue being addressed, who else is in that space, before ever convening a formal collaborative meeting. And I think that's really, really a great technique because it covers off most of the bullets that are here. If we go to the next slide, I think once you actually are looking to that place where you're actually wanting to formalize and bring people together, you want to have an articulation around what is that problem that you're trying to solve, right? And one of the things I love about this slide in particular and the collaboration skills that are here is that for me, it really kind of highlights this ongoing creative balance that needs to be kept between the product, i.e., what are we collaborating around and building clarity around that's shared, and simultaneously thinking from a process perspective. Are we setting the container and are we getting the agreements between collaborative partners that allow us to build a table that nurtures the kind of trust that Liz showed on that collaboration spectrum is absolutely required, right? To help us not only get the work started and work well together, but to continue to bring people on and get ourselves through conflict and that kind of thing as well. So if we go to the next slide. Again, you know, this is really speaking to a lot of those important process pieces. And I know for me personally, like you often get impassioned about the issue, right? And so it's easy to dive in and want to focus on the issue, but this internal sort of process related stuff is the stuff that builds the foundation you need to do the work. And it's stuff that you have to continually keep coming back to. You don't just do it at the start. You need to keep grounding everyone in it as we continue to learn to work together, right? And so I think this list here gives you a really nice sort of checklist of the important elements that you've had conversations with collaborative partners around to create that container. So do you have decision-making structures that you've figured out amongst yourselves? What's it going to take to build capacity for shared understanding? I think, Liz, you had a great story from your Hamilton Roundtable days where you spent a meeting with everyone at the collaborative leadership table talking about what drew them to this issue of poverty. And it allowed them to share other dimensions of themselves than just the role and or organization or group affiliation that people just knew and assumed. It really kind of was a game changer. Yeah. I don't know if you want to.
I think you're absolutely right, Sylvia. That's a really good thing, and it speaks to the culture aspect that Linda also talked about. And I think at Tamarack we've used the question, "Why is it important that I'm here?" Right, as a way of framing that conversation. Because when you ask that question about why is it important that you're here, today or whenever, it's really a case of people showing up with not only the passion that they have for that thing, that the problem or the opportunity, but also the passion that they bring personally to the work. And it's a really powerful conversation. And so often we get right into the work of collaboration without kind of creating the relational elements that are so critical to the work.
I love it. And it's also a great question because it's a question everyone can speak into. And I know another sort of very important principle that we bring to how we think of multi-sector collaboration at Tamarack is the absolute necessity to have people who we refer to as the context experts, right? The people with lived and living experience of this issue sitting right alongside the other experts in helping to resolve this issue. And there's, and asking a question about why it's important that I'm here invites all of us to show up, right? As people who care deeply about this issue. And I think that that's important. All right, on to the next, please. So I really like this way of thinking about how we engage people. And when I was looking at this in preparation for our conversation, the other thing it really reminded me of is that often, important to remember that for effective collaboratives to work, there are a multitude of different roles that we need. So, forming the leadership table is probably the one that at the beginning we're most hyper focused on. But as we're going out and doing the engagement work that's so essential to lay the foundation for collaborative work, in the back of your mind, I think it's really helpful to use this engagement cycle and to really remember. So we've met with this person, who's representative of a group. What is it we're asking them of? So this is our opportunity to reground in what's the problem we're wanting to address, and also or what's the hope, right? Or the aspiration that we are setting around a particular issue. Being as clear as we can and as concrete and specific as we can about what is the nature of, the involvement that you want from this particular partner. What kinds of contributions might they offer? What are you looking for? And then in the back of your mind, right, as you're having these dialogues, how will you know that they've been engaged? And then how will you continue to keep them engaged, regardless of whether they were agreeing to the position that you assumed that they would hold with you? You know, it's this ongoing relationship maintenance thing that I think is really important. But just being really mindful and strategic about that. And as the leadership table grows, with every round of sort of continued engagement that we do, holding us all to kind of that kind of rigor, I think is really important. All right, next one. I love this. For me, we have to have faith in the collaborative process. And in fact, time and again, I think one of the reasons that personally I am so drawn to bringing diverse perspectives around the same table is, you know, if we always meet with the people we've always met with, is it going to be any surprise to us that the solutions that we keep coming up with are the same ones that we've always come up with, right? So one of the big attractors for me around a collaborative effort is that structurally we're going to be bumping into people who we wouldn't normally work with. And I think that has two benefits. Like immediately it challenges the blinders and the assumptions that I may be holding about how we're going to get to solution on this issue. But the other thing that it does is it lays the foundation for creating a whole community response to a particular issue. And when the issue is a complex one, like food insecurity or homelessness or poverty, or your job to fix it. Because honestly, if they knew how to fix it, they would have done it by now. On to the next. All right, Liz, over to you. Collaboration endings.
Yeah, I think, Sylvia, thanks for setting up the beginnings part of collaboration. I'm going to end this with the endings part. And, you know, one of the big motivations behind the paper was just some thinking that I had about, you know, we're okay at beginnings. Some of us are excellent at beginnings. We're very thoughtful and we think about, you know, the process and who to invite, and we do our 100 cups of coffee, and we have the intentionality around engagement. Some of us are really good at that. Some of us are medium good at that, and some of us are emergent at that, but we're not very good at endings. Mostly what I've observed around collaborative tables is that we pay attention to the law of the feet. So people start walking away from the table. So we have, like, we start with 10 people a year into the process, or 6 months into the process, we might have 5 people. And then, you know, we're still calling the meetings and maybe 1 or 2 people show up. So this endings thing we need to get better at, because when we don't end well, it creates the conditions where people in the future may not be willing to join a collaborative table. And that certainly isn't the intention. I think our intention should always be to leave the world better off than we joined it. And so by ending well, we have this opportunity to have a really great collaborative experience, to celebrate the contributions that were made around the collaboration table, and to create the conditions where the next time someone is invited to a collaboration, they will consider it to be a positive experience. And so that's why I was kind of more focused on the endings than the beginnings, but I think that both are important. So here's some of the impacts of positive versus negative endings. And so if we go to the next slide, a positive ending can be where the collaboration has the opportunity to really reflect on, you know, both the purpose that they started out with, but also where they landed at the end of the collaboration. The other thing to think about from a positive ending, and I kind of noted this in the chat box, is to put some time boundaries around your collaboration effort. So often we kind of maybe don't join a collaboration table because we don't know if it's going to be a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and we're worried about being able to make that commitment. So putting some of those time boundaries around that, really understanding what the purpose is, and checking in regularly around Are we achieving our purpose? Is there still energy for us moving forward? Those are things that establish the conditions for positive endings. Some other things to think about from a positive ending perspective is that you want to signal to the group, hey, we said we were going to be here for a year. It's starting to come to the end of the year. Let's start to plan our exit strategy. So some of those early signals can be really important for groups so so it's not a surprise, right? And also the group might then be invited to think together, what might be next for us, right? It might be that we shut down the table. It might be that you go into a phase 2 of the work or a phase 3 of the work. And I think a really positive ending is when you are able to bring as many of the collaborative partners together and really do a reflection session. And 2 questions we like to use at Tamarack when we do reflection sessions is what worked well and what might we change? And so again, it's an invitation to the folks around the table to identify those things that they really thought were a great part of the collaboration experience, and also invite those things that they might change in retrospect. Negative endings happen all the time. Sometimes it's because the convener of the collaborative changed their job. Then nobody brought the group back together so that was a pretty negative ending, because if you were really engaged in that collaboration and then you were never called to another meeting, you're probably sitting there wondering, okay, so what's happening here? And nobody reached out to you to let you know that, in fact, the ending was happening. As I mentioned, collaboration members no longer show up. That's another kind of negative ending. And you can imagine the impacts on that for the convener of the collaborative and for the other people who do show up. They're thinking to themselves, well, why am I here if other people aren't here? I thought we were still working on this project together. And so there's confusion. There's probably an elephant in the room that nobody wants to articulate. And then actually by having members not show up, that creates the conditions where other members may not show up, right? And so you start to see this kind of tumbling effect. Another example of a sometimes negative ending, although it's not always a negative ending, is that the funding for the work is no longer available. So if you have a signal that this 1-year funding opportunity, then you might set your time boundaries to be a 1-year funding opportunity. In some cases, we're very hopeful that we might renew the funding, and that doesn't happen. And so that then can create the conditions where people are confused and worried and not really knowing what the status is. So be upfront about that. Say we might apply, but we might, it's very competitive right now in terms of funding. And so you really want to think about, how do we prepare the group for the ending that is occurring in front of us. The next slide goes into a little bit more of what we were thinking about and what we're suggesting. So here are the questions. What have we done well? What could we improve? What should we do to improve our next collaboration effort? So depending on where your collaboration is, if it's a multi-sector collaboration, if it's a single sector collaboration, you want to kind of think about what would have helped, for the next collaboration effort. You want to kind of document your results, and, feeding them back out to the group is a really nice way of both acknowledging what you heard, but it's also an implied thank you to them. Some of us can send gratitude gifts. Others, I would say, send a gratitude note, because people have put their time and energy into the collaboration. Even if you've had a negative ending of some sort, I think gratitude always goes further than we can imagine. So, you might say in your gratitude note with a negative ending, we're sorry that we ended this way, but we still want to acknowledge the time, the commitment, and the passion that you brought to it. If you're in the negative ending category and everybody has left the table and you're there on your own, I would still encourage you to document the lessons that you're learning about the collaboration, and still send that gratitude note to others, because when you document the lessons that you're learning about the collaboration, it's really about how you, when you go into your next collaboration experience, can improve the experience, not only for yourself, but you'll be improving the experience for others as well. So ending well is a gift to you if you're the convener. It's a gift to others around the table, and it's a gift to future collaboration. So please do think about that. That was kind of the big motivation. So if we go to the final slide, we wanted to, before we open it up for questions, wanted to leave this kind of quote for you from Clarissa Pinkola Este. Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world all at once, but of stretching out to mend part of the world that is within our reach. And I think that that's what we're doing. That's a big motivation behind collaboration, is that we're stretching ourselves to fix a part of the world that is within our reach. And when we end well, what we're doing is that we're creating the conditions for that part of the world to be fixed by others, even if we're not at the table in the future collaborations. So Sylvia, I'm going to throw it back to you to open it up for questions and maybe some reflections from the chat box.
Beautiful. Well, while we're I'm looking to Jaime to get a handle on how we're doing. Are there questions that we have? And if so, let's open it up. But I have to say, before we go to the first question, Liz, I think for me, one of the things that your story about endings reminded me is doing some work with Wellbeing Waterloo Region, which was supported and funded as this really rich, diverse, collaborative work with public sector support. And as the community, the government was pulling away from its formal involvement and resourcing of the collaborative, they had such a beautifully intentional process about who's going to be the holder of this knowledge, right? And of the other partners from the work we've done, what needs to continue and how do we want to structure ourselves? So there was really a lot of intentionality and resource put into facilitating what I thought was an excellent ending. Right? And how it really helped highlight to me as well, you know, in the spirit of relationships and trust, if we've been working collaboratively, we've put the word out in a much broader circle than our own collaborative table about probably some of the work. And so being able to signal a formal ending and honor the trust that the community has in us and assure them that that knowledge isn't lost is another layer, I think, that I would want to include in sort of the endings, right? Preserving the relationships well, even if the work in this iteration is ending, is fabulous. Yeah. So what do we have as a question? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Liz.
No, I was just going to say, I agree with you, Sylvia. So Jaime, over to you for the questions and our comments.
Yeah, so one question that we did see come up was someone was wondering, and I think you may have addressed this a bit in the chat, Liz, but I thought we'd bring it up to the group, which was someone wondering how we might incentivize collaboration building, for example, motivation to action. And they had suggested perhaps this is the role for AI agents looking ahead. Have you come across that in any of your learnings that you've done?
No, I'm intrigued by the use of AI on this. I think there has been conversations about incentivizing collaboration a whole variety of different ways. I think there are at least two ways to consider this this notion of incentivizing. Some people will have the incentive because if you ask the question, why is it important that they're here? You're going to hear why it's important. And so listening to that is really helpful. And then trying to figure out, okay, as we move our collaborative work forward, how do we pay attention to what people have said? Another tool that we use a lot at Tamarack is the gives, gets, and constraints tool that Sylvia worked on, which is what can I give to this collaboration? What do I need to get from this collaboration and what are some of the constraints that I work with. Having those kinds of conversations really honors the constraints that we all have in our organizations and in the work that we're doing. So for example, if you're a member of a school board, you might work only on an academic year. If you're a member of a nonprofit, you might have, the year from September to, September to December as the busiest time for your nonprofit. So really understanding constraints is, I think, very helpful. The other thing about incentivizing is to consider that for some people, particularly individuals with lived and living experience, they might not have the financial wherewithal to be able to join in the table. So how do we compensate fairly individuals around the table, and what are the policies around compensation that really recognizes and values the contributions of everyone around the table? So again, different ways of thinking about incentivizing people, but I'm intrigued about AI. So I'm going to take a look at that and think about, I think AI can be a really good tool in terms of continuous communication, those kinds of things. And so how might we do this? Linda, I want to turn it to you. What other things might you add from incentivizing perspective?
Well, I think I think you've named some of the key ones. I think at the end of the day, you talked about the notion of passion being absolutely central, and trust, and some of these things that are harder to sort of see, but are absolutely critical to whether or people stay involved or even are prepared to commit.
So interesting, because I was thinking as well, the gives, gets, and constraints, right? And when you look at it through the lens of incentivizing, what's an incentive for me to be here could be very different from what the incentive is for you. And I think I love that, but knowing that is important. And it reminded me of the work of Michael McAfee, and one of his famous quotes is, the price of collaborate, like the price of participation is contribution. And so it kind of came up as I was thinking about incentivizing and saying, there, and it links to your comment, Linda, as well, about passion. There has to be more than a transactional nature, I think, in some of the most robust collaborations that I've seen. I'm here for something more than just a clean give and get. Right? And that the expectation is my contribution of knowledge, of time, of participation is part of, it's not just about, it's about giving as much as it is, what am I going to get? If you know what I mean. Like we need both, right?
And I think this notion of AI, in an organization, creating all kinds of efficiencies can work more effectively because it stays put. There is some amount of hierarchy, and collaborations are by nature more complex. And so I worry a little bit about AI, and it can make things more efficient, but what will it mean in terms of that being authentic and the deeper relationships that need to be made over and over and over and over again and connected. So efficiency to some of the other elements, it might be a trade-off.
Beautiful.
That is really interesting. One thing that I've been thinking about during this conversation is the questions that Liz was posing that would help you get to that positive ending. Remind me of some of the questions that come up in your sustainability self-assessment, Liz. And I wondered if there's any way we can dive deeper on that, just in terms of like, I know that the self-assessment tool is for the beginning or like as a midpoint check-in as part of your guide on sustainable collaborations. I guess I'm curious about any connections you saw between doing those check-ins and a good ending to a collaboration?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jamie. Maybe you can put a link to the guide in the chat box, but in the guide, the sustainability guide that we worked on at Tamarack, we identified 10 factors of sustainability, but they basically fall into 4 buckets, right? And these are the buckets that we've talked about today. One is people. So what are we doing to effectively engage the collaboration, the folks around the collaboration table? So we've talked about that. What's their culture? What's their feeling around collaboration? Do we have the right people? The second bucket is around process. So do we have the right processes in place? Do we have a common agenda, common shared agenda that everyone has agreed to? To what degree does this common agenda tie into the mission, the vision, and the values of our own organization, as Linda referred to? So there's incentive for us to be at the table around that. The third bucket is around resources. So what are the human and financial resources we need to secure for this collaboration to be successful? And then the final one is around impact. The final bucket is around impact. And so, are we making progress? Did we identify what those success markers are going to be? Are we making progress? And how will we know what the impact is that we're having? And so, yeah, they tie in really nicely to the collaboration beginnings and endings conversation. Because if you think about, a beginning, who are the people? What's the process? What's the resources? What's the impact we want to have? Are all really important beginning conversations and can become equally important ending conversations, right? Did we achieve what we hope to achieve at the end point? So there's a great tool we just wrote that is affiliated with the sustainability guide called Telling Your Collaboration Impact Story, and it looks at those 4 core buckets to really capture your story. And so here's my aha moment from your question is, what if you use that as your reflection session at the end of your collaboration and then built from it a collaboration impact story that you could then share out? Doesn't have to be a long one, could be a page or 2, but then everybody's got kind of a marker that they can share back with their home organizations, which is always a great thing. They can reflect on, but also it becomes like a talisman of sorts that really marks the collaboration. So yeah, great question.
I think one of my favorite aspects of the guide were the stories. And in particular, I think the 2 that really struck me, one was a really well-established collaborative and how they've continually gone through cycles of renewal, as Linda was mentioning in the chat, that's often part of the work, right? And the one in Calgary where they intentionally chose to end. They did a look and they saw, what, the reason that we came together has now been sort of diffused out everywhere. And so we don't need to continue to be the drivers of this anymore. And I thought you don't hear that very often. So I thought that was another really interesting reminder.
I would
sometimes. Go ahead. It's
Linda. Also interesting, and you said this, Liz, but it's counterintuitive at the beginning of a collaboration to talk about the end. And yet it's the perfect time to talk about it because you're there with all kinds of passion and all these, and motivation. And to sort of have that conversation, what would be the conditions that would cause us to end, is going to really feed you in the middle and be important and mean that there's less likelihood of people just quietly walking the law of the feet, the walking away. So just to reinforce how important it is at the beginning to talk about the end.
I agree. Back to you, Jamie.
I absolutely love it.
And of course, now we're almost wrapping up, and I see that a couple more questions have come in. I'm wondering if we can flag one, which is, how do you manage choosing collaborative partners when on a personal level, some staff do not feel comfortable with the organization, but the organization there are values and benefits to collaborating. Is that one we have time for before we wrap up?
Ooh. It's a juicy one. What would you say? I mean, for me, in some ways, maybe the reason for the collaboration is that the organization itself is now becoming aware of a need to shift its own culture, and inviting them into the collaborative might be a way to help build that culture. They also bring with them potentially valuable resources and knowledge and people that could be useful in furthering the objective of the collaborative. So, I mean, there's always, I think, pluses and minuses. The thing I would be curious about, though, given Linda, your comments about is it the individual coming, or is the individual coming as a delegate from the organization? And if they don't have the support of the organization behind them, what would your concerns be, Linda?
I mean, I think a core question to ask is how and where are we misaligned? If they are misaligned because an organization has different values or culture, then that can probably be worked with or should be worked with. If, on the other hand, it's based on a sense that the organization doesn't follow through its reputation in the community, and then that's going to catch up with you in the collaboration. So I think it has to really, really be paid attention to, regardless of the overarching values of the organization, of the collaboration, because collaborations are just people.
I agree. I think if you invite them and like you said, they have that that culture of not following through, it will catch up with you and it will impact you. But the good news is that organizations are dynamic, right? And people come in an organization and people go in an organization. And I think that you want to also be, if they're a community group that you think, let's just watch how they're evolving. Maybe you invite them later on into the collaborative table when they've evolved, or maybe you have a conversation and they don't have to sit at the collaboration table per se, but might, be an advisor of sorts, or be informed, or have a kind of, you have a special relationship with them that still opens the door for them to, not to have influence, but at least they're informed about the work that's going on. And so I think, there's always ways to work, but I do think that if you invite someone and they're going to be a negative influence, that's not only going to be felt by you as the convener of the collaboration, it's going to be felt by every member of the collaboration. And I think that that's, that can be negative in the short and long term.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Looking at the time, and it flies when you're having a really rich discussion, I think it would be time for us to wrap up. Before we do that, I'll just speak really candidly about another webinar we have coming up in 2 weeks that I'll share in the chat. And it is about building a mission-aligned social enterprise. We're really excited to be talking to a few different folks from the Cambridge, Ontario area about social enterprises that they have worked on, and you can learn more at the link I've shared in the chat. Today's session has been recorded, and we'll be sharing the recording and any links that have been shared in the chat, as well as a copy of the slides with everyone who registered. I've also shared a link to our feedback survey in the chat, and it'll show up on your browser once we wrap up. We'd love to hear what you thought about today's session and any suggestions you have for future sessions you'd like to see from the Tamarack Institute. So as always, it's been a pleasure, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
And in the spirit of gratitude, Jaime, thank you for steering us so well this afternoon, and Linda and Liz for the wisdom and the beautiful comments and sharing in the chat to all the participants. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.